Entrepreneur's Enigma is a podcast for the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. So the wins and the fails that we all face being entrepreneurs, how we learn from adversity. Every week I talk to a different entrepreneur with a story to tell. I'm Seth Goldstein. Come with me on the journey. This is Entrepreneur's Enigma. Let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Entrepreneur's Enigma podcast. I am, as always, hasn't changed in 200 episodes or so. Seth, I think about that. I'm like, what's my name again? It's Seth. How's it going, everybody? Today I have Dai Manuel. He is an award-winning digital thought leader and author. He is a husband extraordinaire, a super dad, an all-around enthusiast on life. He's a Canadian. Don't hold that against him. If anything, he's really nice because he's Canadian. Because most Canadians are nice. Americans are asses. So we'll leave it at that. But he wrote a book on the whole life fitness manifesto, 30 minutes a day for a healthier body, mind, and spirit. He lives in Vancouver, downtown Vancouver, living it up, dating his wife, loving life, and he's very jolly too. So that's a good thing. Let's bring him in here. Dai, how's it going, buddy?
It's going great, Seth. I feel this has been a long time coming, and I'm just happy to
all
be here.
great things take some time. So
yes, true that. And thanks for the kind introduction. And it's just good to see you, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does all get started?
You mean just professional life, or just a bit of everything?
How the entrepreneurial journey get started?
Yeah.
Did you do corporate? Did you do?
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone's done corporate at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, for me, I grew up watching two parents that were professionals. Like my mom was an RN, a registered nurse, but she always had a side hustle. Like always, always, like an antique shop, and then eventually a bed and breakfast, and then she got into interior design, and all the while also going back to school to level up her education, get her master's. Especially when my parents separated and divorced, my mom now took my brother and I on as well full time.
Geez,
so
God bless her. God bless her.
Yeah. And that's who raised my brother and I. And, we had a good relationship with my dad, but the main relationship was with my mom. And, but my dad, he was a workaholic, and he'd be the first to admit that. And so that was what I grew up with. So this amazing work ethic that was definitely imbalanced, more energy going towards professional life than personal life. But I'm not complaining. Like, I know that's part of my DNA. And, I valued money. I understood the value of money from early on. And I knew that I wanted to earn my own money. But I also realized early on in the fitness industry, I started getting into fitness around 17, 18 and training people because I went through my own personal change from morbidly obese teenager to healthy human being. And
people blink and they're like, whoa, the die.
Yeah. Well, Seth, most of us get into businesses where, we've accomplished some sort of change or a big change, or we figured out a better way of doing something. And,
absolutely.
And so I had people, especially like friends of my parents, which were 20 years my senior, coming to me. And, as a kid, I'm like, wow, you actually think I've got something of value to offer? Really? Like, because I didn't think that about myself.
Ego boost. Yeah, exactly.
Totally. And so that was sort of my first foray. But I also realized early on that, this is hard because I only have so many hours and so much energy.
Yeah.
And I realized there was sort of a cap with that, but I was okay with that though, because I was young. I mean, I was getting ready to move out to Vancouver from Toronto, you're
originally from the Ontario area.
Yeah, from Ontario. And so we moved out to Vancouver, in 1995 to go to University of British Columbia. But I already knew I wasn't ever leaving. It was the mountains that brought me here. And then it was a girl that kept me here.
Exactly.
And
is your wife from Vancouver?
Yeah, she is. She's from the interior.
You're not allowed to move.
No. You know what? I love this place. If I had to pick anywhere in Canada to live, this is the place. But it's the weather, climate is very much like Seattle for those down south.
Yeah,
and
down
so
south.
the Pacific Northwest is just a beautiful area. Yeah, I mean, you have to be okay with seasons.
Yeah, you get seasons
wet.
There, yeah.
But I love it. And I when on the corporate side, in my early 20s, I got a position in a company that was national across Canada that sold fitness equipment.
We're going to take a quick break, hear from our sponsors, and get right back to the show. So that was in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so it was. But it was outside of my wheelhouse from the standpoint, I never really worked in a former sales type of role, especially one that was
Oh.
performance-based pay. A
Ooh, that's
pay
tough, yeah.
structure where literally I remember I went in to buy a heavy bag. Okay, Seth. Like I was like, I'm going in to buy a heavy bag. This is like the most this is a company that, right around when Home Depot came out, and Home Depot was like, we're going to build these big, massive centers, but out in the middle of nowhere. So it's cheap
Yeah,
overhead rent. We'll spend a lot of money to drive traffic to these locations.
literally,
And
literally drive traffic, yeah.
totally. And I mean, that was really the invention. We saw the big box wave, especially in the 90s and in the early 2000s, all these big sort of conglomerates doing that model. And
Mhm.
in Ontario, there was a very savvy business guy that was like, hey, I wonder if we could do that for fitness. And
Oh,
lo and behold, Fitness Depot was founded out in Cornwall, Ontario, and they went national by buying out
wow.
little franchise partners in each province. So each province had their own little guy that was basically owning the market, and they just said, "Well,
Yeah.
listen, we'll go and we'll buy you, and we'll rebrand as us."
Yeah,
And
spread.
it was smart, but they spent most of their a good chunk of their profits, gross profits specifically, towards marketing because they were saving
Oh,
so much on the rent. And so they
yeah,
drove traffic in. And I was one of those people. I saw the ads multiple times. And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to go in and buy a heavy bag. And
yeah.
the manager's like, hey, you seem to really like this stuff. And I'm like, I love this stuff, And she's like, well, do you think you'd want to work in a place like this? I'm like, really? I wasn't even on my radar, to be perfectly honest. I didn't go in there with that
Wow.
intention. And then she walked me through sort of the process. And I was like, wow. So you're telling me the more people I help with buying the right thing so they get the right results, you're going to pay me more money. And she looks at me and she says, yes. And I was like, when can I start? you
That's
know,
awesome. You walked in for a heavy bag, you walked out with a job. Did you
I
actually get the
did.
heavy bag too or no?
Yeah, I did. I bought the
So
heavy
you
bag. I
walked
wasn't
out
gonna
with the heavy
wait
bag
till
and a job.
yeah, yeah. They ended up kicking back 50% of it because they did have a great employee discount program, which I got, after my 3 month probation, which was really cool, really nice of them. But it was
Very
super
Canadian of
cool.
them, very Canadian of them.
Yeah, very Canadian.
You never
Yes,
see a
this is
US
true.
conglomerate do that ever.
Well, and keep in mind, this is also a privately owned and operated company,
Yeah.
and so there is a little bit more flexibility because they did run very much like a mom and pop in the early days, and I think that's also what attracted
Oh,
me to it
yeah.
because they promoted from within, but they had
Yeah.
a really intense training program,
Well, that's good.
and
Yeah.
I was also someone in my early 20s that I was starving for the mentorship. I was literally starving for it. I felt I had this unquenchable thirst to just learn, and
Yeah.
professional growth was the thing that I was leaning in on, and I found a mentor, who was the joint venture partner of this Western based companies. So he owned the BC marketplace. And so
Oh,
he
wow.
closed his existing chain of stores to open up as a joint venture partner with this new brand. And he took me under his wing. He saw something in me. He was 20 years my senior
Yeah.
and he saw
Like
something in
like
me. And
all your parents'
yeah,
friends saw something in you too, so clearly there's
yeah,
something there. So
there's something with these. I definitely was doing the right things. And I think it's just because
yeah.
I always treat people with respect, like I'm
Yeah.
not, unless you give me a reason not to,
Yeah,
I'm
exactly,
I'm
exactly.
I'm going to presume that you're just a good person, a good human
Yeah.
being. And fortunately for me,
It's
he
easier in
saw something.
Canada, though. It's easier in
Well,
Canada.
I haven't lived in the States for a long period of time, so I can't really comment on that. But
You
I
don't
can
have to
say that
comment, I'm commenting enough for you.
well, it's the cultural differences, I guess, and
You go a little farther south, it gets a little wacky, and you go farther south, it gets a little wacky, and then you can talk about Mexico because that's farther south, but I'm sure that they
yeah.
still claim that, like, we're nicer than them or they're nicer than us or whatever.
Well, there's nice people everywhere. Look, Seth,
There
and
is.
so
So you did
I
corporate for
loved
a
it.
while.
I worked in corporate. I moved up very quickly. Within the first 18 months, I made a decision not to go back to school and finish my degrees because I was making more than a lawyer, a junior lawyer, and more than
Wow.
a senior teacher, right? And I was making six figures, and I didn't feel I was
As a
working that hard to do that.
20-something-year-old where it's like 6 figures is a shitload of money.
It for a guy, yeah, that wasn't even
For a
25
20
yet.
early 20-something-year-old getting, lure money, it's like, what do I do
Yeah.
with all this money?
And I was still living with a roommate, cheap rent. Most of our I mean, we worked hard, but we partied harder. Okay. And
Yeah.
it was just
I mean,
that
you're
time of
20
life.
something. I mean, I'm sure you can't
Yeah.
party like that anymore. I'm sure.
No.
I'm sure you're like, I want to go to bed.
Well, and to be honest, Seth, it was more than a habit for me too, drinking, and it became
Yeah.
very challenging because there's about a 15-year period of my life, especially during that professional growth phase, where alcohol was always around. which is really
You
interesting because
schmooze, you're always at a bar schmoozing with
yeah,
people. Yeah, this is part of the nature.
because once I got into management, and specifically, an opportunity came after 5 years with that company, the joint venture partner that I alluded that was mentoring me,
Yeah.
he was falling out with his partners, the national partners.
Uh-oh.
And it was
Yeah.
an ugly divorce, let's just say that. And but I was his key guy.
You were
And
his guy. Yeah.
as the words of the Godfather, he made me
Yeah.
an offer I couldn't refuse, and,
Exactly.
and he literally,
Do you ever see the show Suits?
oh yeah, I remember
Yeah,
Suits. Yeah, yeah.
you're like Mike Ross, only not a fraud.
Yes, yes. Okay, similar situation,
Yeah.
because he saw something in me. He was like, "Oh my god, I gotta go do this a third time, a third time." He had an existing company. He folded it. He opened up this new one, and he's like, "Gosh, I gotta do it again." And he's like, he's looking at me. I'm in my mid 20s. He's in his mid 40s. Like he's basically the age that I am now.
Yeah.
And I'm just imagining me mentoring a guy in his early 20s right now, and I get
Oh,
it. I sort of have this different sort of view on this now, and
yeah.
I admire him, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity because he gave me an opportunity to be a joint partner with him, and then we
Oh,
went and
wow.
started our own company. And
That's fun.
oh, it was, and I did that for another 12 years,
Oh,
and so
geez.
17 years in total in that industry, and it was
Yeah.
awesome, Seth. I learned a lot. I did,
Yeah, I mean,
and
even the downsides of, like, alcohol and all that, it's everything happens for I always feel like everything happens for a
yeah,
reason, and, like, just realizing, "Alright, I'm done with that part of my life. Let's move
yeah.
on," and that kind of thing.
I sort of had to hit my head against the wall a few times, both
Yeah, it
literally and
happens. We're
figuratively.
guys. We're guys.
Uh,
We're a little
thir-
thick-headed.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, it wasn't until 32 when all of a sudden I realized that my professional life, my personal life, it was all colliding and not in a very positive way. From
Ooh.
the standpoint, what I was doing on the personal side of things was now encroaching into the professional side of things, and vice versa.
Mhm.
And at 32, I realized, either I make a change or I have to accept the consequences that are coming, which were very clear. My wife threatened to leave me.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Work was very challenged at that time as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't an easy period. So from the time that I gave up the booze, like I
Yeah.
basically said, okay, no more alcohol, so I can say yes to everything else that I've always said I wanted, but I've been shirking off because of the alcohol.
Mhm.
And
And that shit gets
in that
expensive
space,
too.
well, it does, but it's the lost revenue. And what I mean by that is the lost productivity, the
Mhm.
lost advancement, the lost growth. Like when I really started to look at, because and also as I was going into my early 30s, I was
Yeah.
realizing the recovery was taking longer too, right? Like
Oh, yeah,
it's
'cause everything takes longer, absolutely.
and so I ventured off on my own, and I realized I didn't want to keep doing retail.
Yeah,
Retail's
that'll
hard.
do it, yeah.
It's hard. It was definitely wearing me out, and so I transitioned into doing what I was already doing, sort of as my own side hustle, even while I was still
So you was
building
a
my
side
career.
hustle during all this. Oh my god, you were busy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I had the space and I had the energy because I had
You were
eliminated
only
this alcohol
32,
piece.
yeah, that's still
Yeah,
young.
yeah. And so I didn't have all these distractions, and so I was using that extra time to really build my own profile online, which originally the intention was to grow the business, our business
Yeah.
that we co-founded called Fitness Town. And
Oh, okay. Oh, and he disappeared. We're gonna pause for a second, and, we're back! We're back!
all right, yeah. So as I was saying, it just I realized that during those years of working within that company and that organization, I had gained a lot of great experience and great knowledge.
Yeah.
And while I was building that side hustle, and it wasn't really a side hustle initially, because I realized whole social media thing was sort of blowing up. This is sort of the 2006, 2007.
Yeah, the Twitter era, the Twitter good
Yes,
era, yeah.
Twitter was like it, right? I mean, it was all
Yeah,
over the place. I had people in the networking groups I was a part of talking about this thing. And
yeah,
then I had the book by Gary Vaynerchuk, his
yeah,
first book, Crush It, recommended to me.
yeah.
And I read it on a flight from
I have an
Vancouver to
autograph
Toronto.
I had an autograph, a copy back there
Oh,
somewhere, yeah.
are you kidding? That's so
I've
cool. And
met
so
him, he's a good guy, yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's funny. I haven't met him yet, but he was
Talk about high
extremely.
energy, you think you're high energy.
Oh,
Woo!
I've watched a lot of his videos. I'll tell you that. But it was just so influential at that time in my life because it was just a
Yeah,
different way of looking at things, and a
yeah.
different way of serving an audience and potentially a client base. But now I didn't have any boundaries to consider. I didn't have these
Oh, that's nice,
geographical
yeah.
locations, and but I also thought it would elevate the profile of the company, which it did. I remember selling a treadmill over Twitter to a guy that lives up in Fort McMurray. So Fort McMurray, for those that don't know, Edmonton, Alberta.
Oh,
There's
wow,
lots of
really out in the middle of nowhere.
oil
Yeah.
sands, right? It's where most of the oil in Canada comes from, is up in the oil sands. So
Yeah.
Fort Mac is this very eclectic community of a lot of people that work on the drinks. And I was talking to a guy over Twitter, and I sold him a treadmill from our Edmonton store, like all over Twitter, right? And I was like, after I
Isn't it
did that, my
fun?
partner,
Yeah, I used to do
he
a
was
lot of
like,
things on Twitter,
oh,
yeah.
and that was the cool thing you could do, right? Like you could
Yeah.
literally create these great relationships and be a professional and still maintain a certain personal value, which I found really
Exactly.
interesting,
And so
like,
then and then that's when you were on your own. You went out, you started deciding to do more fitness stuff, the
yes,
happiness, the kind of like you got yourself in line and stuff like that. So what is the best thing about being an entrepreneur now? That you've done the corporate thing, you've done the entrepreneur thing, you've done the
yes,
sales thing. What's the best thing about being an entrepreneur now, besides the fact that you can take a few days off if you don't feel good?
yeah.
So
Well, that is definitely one thing, but second to that was the ability it gave me when I left really the corporate structure to
yeah,
lean into more of this, let's call it digital entrepreneurship, like really
yes,
working online. And all of a sudden I realized there is no geographical boundaries now for
there's no,
wherever I could work. Just the only thing that was contingent was I needed internet connection.
yeah.
And I
Which is
also
failing us
realized,
today, but, whatever.
yeah, you got to say, like Seth, also my kids were, both were just over the age of 10, but not quite teenagers yet.
Yeah,
And
the
I
starting to be the
wanted,
smelly years.
dude, I wanted to have more time with them,
Yeah,
and being a full solo entrepreneur, someone that was doing my own thing, I
yeah,
realized it would give me the flexibility and freedom to have more time with my family,
I love it.
to travel. And
Yeah.
mind you, I had no idea how to do any of that stuff. Like I didn't. I had no idea. Like, but I saw lots of examples of others that were doing it. I
Yeah,
looked at what they were doing. I was like, I can do that. Like I could do that. And
yeah,
I also had a friend that's a social media marketer, and he looked at my socials, looked at my website, and he's like, dude, are you making any money with this stuff yet? I'm like, what? You can make money doing this? And
it's
and
sweet, yeah.
I had no idea. That's how green I was to this whole space. And so I just leaned in. I found
Leaned
some
in.
good coaches. I found a good mentor, and I
Yeah,
just humbled myself to the space. And
love it.
um, but I love it because of the time aspect. But there are the challenges too. And I
Oh, there
think
are.
most of the,
That's the other
yeah,
question you're getting ahead, but yeah, that's the other question. What keeps you up at night with being an entrepreneur? Yeah.
it's the mental health load, I think, is the best way
Mhm.
to put it. And what I mean by that is, there's tight times. I mean, during COVID, I remember 60% of my forecasted revenue for the year gone overnight, like
Yeah,
literally gone,
quickly.
because I had nothing in my own right. I couldn't look at my clients that were in contracts with me and enforce those. There's no
Yeah.
way, because their
No.
businesses were decimated literally overnight. So, we were all in that boat, and so that was tough. But fortunately for me, my
Yeah.
my wife works, and so she supported the family for those
Oh,
couple
yeah.
months, while I tried to recalibrate.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but that's a common up and down with being an entrepreneur, because it is very much like being on an island at times, even though it doesn't have to be. It has those
Oh,
moments,
absolutely. It's ups and
Yeah,
downs. So what is the most
yeah.
important thing to carry with you all the time?
You mean literally, or
Or
just as far as,
figuratively, you can go as woo-woo as you wanna go.
yeah? Well, I think having a positive mental attitude is very,
Yes.
very good.
Yeah.
Now again, I'm not talking about positive toxicity. And what I mean by that is, there's one thing where, that whole adage, fake it till you make it, right? And I
Yeah.
can appreciate there, it makes sense in some situations. Just believe as if you are, and do as if you already are that, and
Yeah.
watch, maybe things will happen. But just being positive when on the inside you're not feeling very positive,
Yes, it doesn't work.
well, it's tough, because it's not authentic. It's not really aligned with where we're at. And sometimes we just have to allow ourselves to feel. It's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel uncertain. It's okay
Yeah.
to feel shaky. Like, that's just part of life and business. And
Yeah.
I find sometimes positive mental attitudes, if we rely on that solely and just expect that that's going to make everything okay, that's where I've run into problems. I'm just being transparent here,
Yeah,
like I
absolutely.
could,
Yeah.
I found myself, it didn't matter how much positive I want to be. I truthfully wasn't believing it, at the time based on what was going on. And it really came down to action. I just wasn't
Mhm.
doing the right actions with
Yeah,
the right
yeah, do it.
outcomes being expected. And yeah, and that was tough. So positive mental attitude, but with a grain of salt. Okay.
I love it. I love it. So Di, where can people find you online? What is your watering hole of choice now? And don't say X. Please don't say X.
Well, I love LinkedIn. I really do enjoy that. But also Facebook and Instagram. I'm
I
most
know. I
active on
saw your
those
Instagram.
those
Your
three.
Instagram's fun. Your Instagram's
Yeah.
fun. I enjoy it.
I
I was looking around that
thank
earlier.
you. Thank you.
You get
I
the
I
real
try to have
sense
fun
of
with
who
it.
you are and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's I mean, I look at it as just a little window into who I am, and if people find some motivation, inspiration, and hopefully a little bit of education,
And also check
uh,
out his book on Amazon too. Get that
yeah,
book.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
I
but,
love it.
Seth, just real quick though, just to really commend you. I mean, 200 plus episodes is freaking
Yeah, this
phenomenal.
is this was a pandemic project.
It's
And I've been
amazing.
podcasting since 2010, but this is a pandemic project and it just keeps going. And I'm like, all right, we're gonna keep going with this. I
I
gotta put out
freaking
two a
love it.
week, but two
I
episodes
love
out a
it.
week and a newsletter. I have no idea how I do it.
It's incredible, man. I mean, thank you for inspiring and showing what's possible because when I looked at your platform and I started looking at all the episodes and the
Yeah.
conversations and listening in, there's a wealth of information. And I wish
There's a
I had
book
the
there
little
somewhere. There's a
windows when
book.
I got into entrepreneurship, I had access to this, and that's
Oh,
why I
no,
think your
that
podcast
means
is
so much to me.
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh,
There's a
amazing.
book there. There's a book, and I'm working with my journalism professor to try and figure out, where that is in here and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So we'll see
Ah,
one day. But this has been great. Di, thank you for
thank you.
coming on. And on your first call since you kind of got reinvigorated, and that's fantastic. And
Thank you.
that's
Thank you,
I'll let
Seth.
you go because it's 1:27 here. It's what 10:27 there.
You bet. You bet.
I did the
And
math right. Time zone suck. Exactly. But definitely go kill it the rest of the day. Go rock and roll, my friend.
Thank you, Seth. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I can reciprocate because
Yeah,
I'm
we'll
finally
stay in
launching
touch.
my own podcast, and I can't
There
wait to
you
get you
go,
on.
buddy. That's what I like to
Yeah,
hear.
yeah.
And on
Well,
that
you're
note, we'll
you're
see everyone next time. That was a great show. If you're enjoying Entrepreneurs Enigma, please review us in the podcast directory of your choice. Every review helps other podcast listeners find our show. If you're looking for other podcasts in the marketing space, look no further than the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcasts.net. Goldstein Media hopes you have enjoyed this episode.